episode of Bad Takes in Football. I'm your host, Bad Takes. We will be getting started shortly. Gonna let some people file in real quick, okay? Like I said, we'll get started shortly. While we're waiting for people to join, how does everyone feel about that contract that Terry McLaurin got today? Really happy for him. Really happy for the Commanders. I think this is going to have a big impact on the Commanders, especially Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels had a great relationship with Terry McLaurin last year. He had just over half of Jaden Daniels' passing touchdowns with 13. So I think with the addition of Deebo Samuel, I think that's going to be a really big addition for the Commanders. So very happy for Terry McLaurin. To me, again, he's a culture guy there for the Commanders. I definitely see him making a big impact for them. But like I said, we'll get started. We have a very interesting sort of I guess you could say topic headlines coming today. If you couldn't tell from the thumbnail, we're going to be going over something fun. We're going to have a little fun with this, play around with this a little bit, kind of similar to what you'd see at the end of the year while you're in school, like in the yearbook. We're going to do sort of senior superlatives. So we'll go over some of those. Some of those are fun. Some of them are, I would say a little bit more on topic with football itself and statistics and performance. But we also have some fun ones going on in there. While before I get into that, feel free to drop any sort of senior superlatives that you're curious to see or want to get my take on. Whether that's something along the lines of like best dressed, best smile, most likely to become a police officer, whatever that might be. Again, drop that in the comments. While you're also here, make sure you comment. Tell me what team you're excited to see this year, whether it's your team overall or just someone that you didn't really expect to perform at such a high level in the preseason, and you're excited to see how they do in the regular season. One last thing before I get started, make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is a new channel. I'm on my road to my first 100 subscribers. All those subscriptions would really help me out. It doesn't cost you anything, and it means a lot to me. Helps me get that content out there to more people. Would love to show you all the topics I'm going to cover this year in the NFL. We have some exciting things coming. I plan on doing lives every Monday and Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. From there, I'll also be releasing other videos based off of what happens throughout the week as well as in the games. So excited to get into that. Yeah, Ashton, who is most likely to not have a job next year? Honestly, I think it might be both Spencer Rattler as well as Tyler Shough next year. I don't think either of those players have the best chance of making that team. At this point, I'm not even sure if they have a formidable chance of being a backup. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into today. Again, what we're going to be covering today is senior superlatives. The first award that I want to give out is Class Clown. And again, this is obviously a little bit more subjective, but I think anyone that was watching the preseason this year, as well as just knows him overall, Jameis Winston, to me, is one of the funniest people in the NFL. That guy, I could listen to that guy talk all day, every day, whether it's motivational or from a comical perspective. I'm not sure if anyone saw this clip, but I'll go ahead and share, sort of what I'm talking about here. me make sure to move myself to the corner. But here's a funny clip I found. Here's a funny clip I found on TikTok. This is a interaction between rookie and first rounder Jackson Dart as well as Jameis Winston. So I'll go ahead and play this real fast and just tell me that this doesn't make you laugh. Tell me that this guy right here, Jameis Winston, look, he even knows where the camera is, right? I think this is just proof right here. Just look at this face. Look at the animation in it. He is so excited. He's a great part of this team. You know, I think he's done a good job of connecting with Jackson Dart from a personal perspective. He's probably helping him out on a regular perspective. I'll just keep this on loop here. And yeah, I agree with you, Ashton. One of the biggest mistakes was actually letting Jameis Winston leave. I think Jameis Winston, if he was still on the Saints roster, would be the starter for the New Orleans Saints this year. And I would love to see that because, again, not only is he funny on and off the field, but that guy is fearless as well. He will sling the ball down the field with no apologies, right? Just reckless abandon, providing entertainment on and off the field. So, again, class clown for me goes out to Jameis Winston. This guy is nothing but exciting to me. So the next one, and you know, it's kind of funny because we're obviously keeping this within the same team, and he's actually in this video as well. But the next guy to me that I find the most entertaining, or the next superlative, I'm sorry, that I want to give out, is actually most likely to succeed, right? And again, to me, I fell in love with this guy in the preseason. I didn't really know what to expect out of him coming out of the draft. You know, I thought there was, in my opinion, a pretty weak draft class from the quarterback perspective. You know, Cam Ward obviously went first to the Titans, but the other one to me that I think is just super impressive is Jackson Dart. And I'm obviously showing him right here. But Jackson Dart, again, I really do think he's the most likely to succeed. He's, out of everyone I watched this preseason, you know, especially from, you know, I'd say a rookie and first round perspective, you know, Jackson Dart was extremely exciting to watch for me. I was so impressed with him as a player, and you can kind of see it in these stats right here, right? He threw for 372 yards and 3 touchdowns. And, you know, for me, he also had 68% completion percentage, right? So that alone to me is super impressive. A lot of people, I think, aren't really giving the New York Giants a lot of credit or expecting a lot of them out of them this year, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. So one of the main reasons why people aren't necessarily paying attention to the Giants is the fact that they're sort of in a transition year when it comes to their quarterback play, right? And I would say that Jackson Dart is the person that they're hoping to be the quarterback of the future, but they also picked up Russell Wilson, right? Russell Wilson played 1 year with the Steelers. I would say had a decent year. He's no longer, I would say, the same Russell Wilson that we expect from, you know, I would say 4 or 5 years ago. But at the same time, Jackson Dart had a great season. And I know might just be picking favorites because he's a quarterback and he was a first rounder. But when I watch Jackson Dart, I see a player, I see a quarterback that's going to give his team a chance to win. I see Jackson Dart being someone that will probably not be a starter again right away. I think they're going to give him a little bit more time to get acclimated to the NFL, understand how to watch film, prepare for a game, see how Russell Wilson does that, right? Because Russell Wilson is a professional, right? I think he has a great work ethic, and it's someone that Jackson can really do a lot to learn behind. But for me, I don't see Jackson Dart sitting more than 4 games this year. I think I would give Russell Wilson the start for the first 4 games of this season, just to give him an opportunity, see what Russell Wilson has. Like, right, you did invest in him, but after that, I'm giving this to Jackson Dart because I think, you know, most people are obviously looking at the NFC East and they see the Philadelphia Eagles, right, the reigning national champions, right? The Super Bowl champions, and then they also see the Washington Commanders, who made they made the NFC Championship, right? So two NFC East teams were in the NFC Championship and faced off, and the Eagles obviously prevailed. But Jackson Dart and the New York Giants, to me, I think are a team that could potentially compete for that last wild card spot. I do think that their defense also helps them. To me, I see their young pass rush similar to what the Los Angeles Rams did last year, from a Jared Verse perspective. I think they see a lot. They have a lot of potential when it comes to um, Brian Burns. They have a lot of potential when it comes to Kayvon Thibodeau, as well as Abdul Carter. Right, Abdul Carter is also super exciting. So to me, again, I really see the Giants having a a recipe for success, and I think they're going to surprise a lot of teams. And again, that's why I think Jackson Dart is going to be the most likely to succeed out of this draft class. I look at the future of the Giants moving forward, and I see that future being very bright. I see a lot of hope coming out of the Giants, and a lot of that again becomes because of Jackson Dart, in my opinion. I think he's in a lot better situation than a lot of people think. Think about this: Malik Neighbors, right? Malik Neighbors is his wide receiver one. He's coming off of a very impressive rookie year where he had over 1,200 yards as a rookie. That's extremely impressive. And so again, having a guy like that to have as a safety valve, but also a big play sort of player, I think is going to be leaps and bounds helpful for Jackson Dart. Keldon Banks, Ashton, that's definitely a possible one. All right, so moving on to the next senior superlative. I have another clip to share with you from this perspective, but to me, there's actually it's impressive because to me there's actually two really good catches in this from this season from this preseason, I should say, for Mitchell Tinsley, and I'll show you both of them. But again, to me, best catch goes to Mitchell Tinsley. I'll show you this first one here. This one was in the back of the end zone, toe tapping touchdown, right at the back of the end zone, brings that in for a touchdown. Joe Burrow is going to need a lot of that. I don't think it's going to have to be just from Mitchell Tinsley, but Joe Burrow is going to need to put a lot of points up this year. I think everyone saw the performance of the Cincinnati Bengals when it came to their defensive side. There are certain points, and even in this Washington Commanders game, where their starting defense was going up against a second and third team offense, and they were getting just absolutely mopped. Right? They didn't have a single chance to like, they just didn't look good at all on defense. Like, it was just flat out miserable to watch. If I'm a Cincinnati Bengals fan, I'm begging Trey Hendrickson to come back, because even with Trey Hendrickson, I think they're in trouble. But without them, this team's going to remind me a lot of the Minnesota Vikings, right? When they had Randy Moss, they had Chris Carter, and they had Cunningham as their quarterback. To me, they need that explosiveness. Here's another example of an amazing catch by Mitchell Tinsley. This is on the opposite side of the field, and as you can see, back shoulder rotates perfectly for another touchdown. So again, Mitchell Tinsley to me definitely wins catch of the year. I expect him to be on the Cincinnati Bengals roster first off, but I also expect him to make more of an impact than most people think. Again, they have, I would say, three really good receivers in front of him. It's Jamar Chase, it's T. Higgins, and then it's Yoshavas, right? Andre Yoshavas is definitely their wide receiver three, but right behind him, I would put Mitchell Tinsley right there. I think that's the level that Mitchell Tinsley played at in this preseason game So I had to give him some flowers, and I had to give best catch to Mitchell Tinsley. For my next one, don't have necessarily a video to show from this perspective, but I did want to talk a little bit about a guy that got a contract to start this season, right? Jarrett Stidham, he signed an extension to become the backup for Bo Nix through 2026, and to me, it wasn't necessarily a player that I don't think when he signed this anyone was super excited about. But at the same time, Jarrett Stidham had a great preseason, this preseason, right? He threw for 376 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he had no interceptions. So that aspect alone says a lot about the fact that he has the ability to be I would say a game manager at the very least, right? I don't think they're sitting here thinking that he's going to be, a starter for them for years to come. Again, Bo Nix is going to be that guy for the Broncos, but it's also really nice having someone like a Jarrett Stidham sit behind them that has the experience and could potentially, win some games if necessary if Bo Nix happens to get injured. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't expect that to happen. But to me, Jarrett Stidham, again, is the most changed coming out of this preseason game. He actually got a PFF grade of 90. You know, that was the highest among quarterbacks for returning quarterbacks. And again, for me, that's someone that you're going to want on your team. I've never been super impressed with Jared prior to this season. Right, his best season was in 2022, where he had less than 700 yards. He had 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. So again, in 3 preseason games, he had the same amount of touchdowns. He had no interceptions, and he had about 300 less passing yards, right? And so that you also have to take into account how many opportunities he got, right? Those are full games. Here in the preseason, generally you're not playing the full game, and you're also not trying necessarily to win these games at a super high level. And so, again, for me, most change would have to go to Jarrett Stidham. Next one on this list, and again, let me know if there's any other senior superlatives you want me to talk about. The next one on this list, and this one doesn't necessarily have to do full on with preseason games, but it's life of the party. And we don't have to go into this one too much, but for me, life of the party, when I think of life of the party, I think of, everyone wants this person around. When he gets into a room, everyone's paying attention to him, and, he knows how to have how to have a lot of fun. And so for me, it's George Kittle. There's a couple times that George Kittle has really come into the media limelight. I would say not as big of a deal as holdouts of Michael Parsons or the previous holdout of Terry McLaurin, who is now signed. But George Kittle got his first real attention this offseason with Tight End University. For those who don't really know too much about Tight End University, this is put on by George Kittle. It's also put on by Travis Kelce and Greg Olsen. And really, this was a way for them to try to develop the brand and the position of tight end in the NFL, which has become more and more important in the NFL. I think that's a big aspect to necessarily pay attention to. But they put on this weekly event in Nashville, and it's gotten bigger and bigger. I think it started out with probably somewhere around 15 to 25 tight ends, and this is their 3rd season now, and it's gotten all the way upwards of 80 tight ends have been there. But it's not just tight ends that show up now. They're now having big parties. They're having concerts. Taylor Swift performed at Tight End University. Even the infamous Will Compton showed up to Tight End University. When you talk about Taylor Swift, you talk about Will Compton in the same room. That's a party right there, and you have no one else to thank but George Kittle when it comes to that. So for me, George Kittle will forever be the life of the party. I'm really excited to see him going into this season. I think he's going to be a lot of fun. The other story that where George Kittle, sort of showed up in the media was when the NFL initially came out and it said it was a ban of smelling salts, right? So smelling salts, those things that people smell and then before they get on the field, it helps them get really jacked up, really excited. George Kittle is a habitual user of smelling salts, and when the initial report came out that it was a ban, he thought that you weren't going to be allowed to use them whatsoever. The NFL did retract and sort of revise what they said and said they're just not going to be supplying these smelling salts to players. But again, George Kittle, he's a guy that he loves those. I'll call them performance extracurriculars when it comes to football, is those smelling salts. And so again, for me, George Kittle making a big deal of the smelling salts was really funny. And again, that's a big reason why I have George Kittle as the life of the party. Next senior superlative I have on this list, best bromance. When I think of football, when I think of guys getting out there on the field, I think of camaraderie, I think of friendships, building relationships, and what's a better way to necessarily discuss that besides bromance, right? Bromance has become a thing over the last couple years, and to me, I think it's a vital part of being a teammate, being a friend, and I think this is an award that people should be honored to get this year, right? I think this is probably one of my favorite awards that I'll be giving out, and I plan on doing this year after year. There's one repeat on this, and I apologize for that, but when I get into why, I think you'll understand why. But to me, the best bromance in the NFL preseason has to go to Jackson Dart and Tommy DeVito. If you haven't heard much about Jackson Dart and Tommy DeVito, first off, reports came out that they have bonded over watching Love Island. I don't know about you, but when I think of Love Island, I think of a show that you're forced to watch because your significant other wants you to watch it. Every guy will pretend like they don't care or they're not interested or they think it's dumb. But watching shows like Love Island are what bring people together. It's that corny, stupid TV that doesn't actually mean anything, but you can just watch it, hang out, sit down, not have to think, and you can still have a good time. And to me, the fact that Tommy DeVito and Jackson Dart are watching shows like Love Island together, that's the first, initial signs of what a bromance is going to become, right? These are two backups in New York. These are guys in a big city. Tommy DeVito has really made his name and brand in New York already, right? I think everyone knows about Tommy DeVito, his sandwiches, right? His chicken parms, and then also his agent with his ridiculous hat. But to me, Tommy DeVito and Jackson Dart having the bromance they have, watching Love Island together, is content I want to hear more about. I want to see more of those two hanging out on the sidelines, right? Are they sharing a chicken parmesan on the sideline? At halftime, right? What are they doing on the weekends, right? I'm really excited to see how that relationship goes. Again, senior superlative best bromance goes to Jackson Dart and Tommy DeVito. This next one I actually do have a clip of, and just know before I really get into this, I think it's also important to mention that this was also really close to being another senior superlative to me, but I'm going for most athletic, right? So just understand that, but most athletic, it's going to go to Jahdae Walker, right? Jahdae Walker is a wide receiver out of Texas A&M, and before I show you these clips, just know this is a 6'3", 200-pound receiver, and not only are these catches impressive, but the dance afterwards, and again, that might be sort of alluding to another senior superlative we're going to be seeing, but to me, again, Jahdae Walker had a great performance in the preseason. He's someone that I expect to see a lot out. So again, let's just watch this back real fast, right? In the end zone, over the shoulder of the cornerback, and then look at this dance. How do you even do that? First off, like that alone shows just pure athleticism. Not even forget about the catch. Don't even worry about that catch, right? That was a special in itself. But look, how do you even do that? What is that? If someone asked me to do that, I would say sorry. Like I can't even think about what. But it looks like he's floating. You have to be super athletic just to even do something like that. On top of that, there's another impressive, play he has here to show his athleticism, and it's this one I'd say is more so from a just controlling of the body. So it's this one's in slow mo, so you can see here. But look at that catch. He gets high up there. He gets 1 foot down and then just barely taps that back foot to make this a completion. Again, he's 6'3", 200, almost 210 pounds, and he's making impressive catches like that. This is a guy I expect to see a lot out of potentially for the Bears. I think they have a pretty solid wide receiver room, right? They've invested a lot in wide receivers recently, but to me, again, I really do think that having an athlete like a Jade Walker is going to do leaps and bounds for Caleb Williams and the Bears going into this, because not only did he have those impressive catches, he had 8 receptions for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns this preseason, right? That's some of the tops in the NFL for this preseason alone. So again, Jade Walker is someone that I really think could potentially make an impact. He is a rookie free agent. They haven't announced whether or not he's made the team yet officially, but if I'm the Bears, I'm giving Jade Walker an opportunity. He showed those flashes. He shows he can make plays. Not to mention he's super athletic. He ran a 4.3 in the 40 at the combine, which isn't necessarily lightning speed, but there's a difference between, I would say sprinter speed and gamer speed. And to me, he's shown one, he's fast from a 40 perspective, but from a game speed perspective, he showed it even more. So again, to me, most athletic has to go to Jade Walker. This next senior superlative is a little bit different. It's actually, I'm not even going with a player on this one, unfortunately, but most likely to become president. I don't think a lot of people are going to expect this one, but for me, most likely to become president, head coach of the New England Patriots, Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel, first off, is a super impressive guy, right? He was an edge guy. He was an outside linebacker who I think at this point in time, I actually saw this stat, would be third on the New England Patriots in touchdown passes or career touchdown catches, right? We're talking about a defensive player who has, I think it was something along the lines of 8 career touchdown catches. He was so athletic and so hardworking that the Patriots would put him on the offensive side. But I say all that to say, most likely to become president, Mike Vrabel. I don't know if you were paying attention to this preseason. There was a preseason training camp where they were going up against, I believe it was the Vikings, right? And I'll show you this here just so you can understand what I'm talking about. But to me, Mike Vrabel, the fact that he puts his body on the line, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. 1 second. Let me make myself a little bit smaller here. Make myself a little smaller here. Boom. All right. But here, there's a fight that broke out at Minnesota Vikings and New England Patriots training camp practice. And if you can see here, let's just go back real fast. One of the first guys you see in here, and you can, thankfully they actually showed the arrow, is Mike Vrabel, right? That's Mike Vrabel getting into a pile of just giant human beings, right? That's not easy to do, first off, right? Those people are 300 plus pounds, most of them that are in that pile right there. And they're also much younger than he is. And again, he's going in there, he's fighting for his players. At the end of this is the best part. You can still see him at the bottom. All he's doing is just trying to cover up one of his players that's on the ground, right? So he's just on all fours trying to block a player that's already on the ground there. And so again, for me, that's a guy that I see as a fearless leader. That's a guy I see. Oh, 1 second. That's a guy I see as someone you want to lead, not just your team, your country, right? I think that's a huge aspect of this, is the fact that he is fearless, and I think he's a great leader, and he's someone that I could definitely get behind, right? Mike Vrabel used to piss me off because I'm a Ravens fan, and the Tennessee Titans had the Baltimore Ravens number for a couple years, along with Derrick Henry back there. But Mike Vrabel knew how to play against the Ravens. He matched our toughness at a completely different level than I think anyone else expected. And so again, for me, most likely to become president has to go to Mike Vrabel. And we're already kind of here, so I'll jump into this next one real quick. The next senior superlative I want to get into is best dancer. And that has to be Isaac Tesla. Isaac Tesla, not only did he have an impressive preseason from a catching perspective, but I'll go ahead and get into this real quick and you can show it here. The guy brought back the worm. I love this right here. Look at that dance, right? Let's just go back to this. That is perfect form. I haven't seen someone do the worm like this in a decade. You know, this is a move all the way back from the 90s. And he just brought this move to a whole nother level. I think he went viral for this moment. I expect to see Isaac Tesla as a major impact player for the Lions this year, right? He's I believe a third-round pick out of Arkansas. But when you watch this worm, you can't help but see the athleticism he has. And, you know, I had to give him to him from a dancing perspective. You know, like I said, I almost had Jade Walker here. I showed you his touchdown dance he had where he was essentially floating while walking. But, again, Isaac Tesla had, I mean, that worm, I could watch this over and over again. So, again, for me, best dancer, senior superlative, goes to Isaac Tesla. This next senior superlative, I don't have a clip for, but I wanted to do a senior superlative for perfect attendance. Now, the preseason is a place where a lot of people get opportunities, right? This is a place where you get your time to shine. It's also a time where teams really rest their top players. You know, I think there's different strategies nowadays. You'll see it, like I'll bring up the Chiefs, right? The Chiefs generally have their starters out there for at least one series in every preseason game. Sometimes they might skip that, but they generally have their starters for at least one series in a preseason game. The Cincinnati Bengals, who have struggled to get up and running this preseason or the previous seasons, you know, they've been playing a lot. In the preseason, their starters have Joe Burrow, who, you know, got thrown around by some defenders of the Commanders in his preseason game against the Commanders. You know, he also had some impressive throws to people like Jamar Chase, who had actually had a couple impressive catches and even a long touchdown catch. But regardless, I say all this to say there's some players out there that just have to take the brunt of it, right? There's players out there that they are probably playing from the first quarter until the end of the game because they're trying to rest players in front of them. And this player had the most amount of carries in the preseason, right? So perfect attendance goes to D'Ernest Johnson, right? Running back for the Baltimore Ravens out of South Florida, who's been in the league for about 5 to 6 years now at this point, right? And so that's another aspect of this that I think is interesting and why I want to give my flowers to D'Ernest Johnson. You know, he's not someone that is a rookie trying to prove himself that he belongs in the NFL. You know, Johnson is sitting here trying to prove that he still belongs in the NFL, right? Running back rooms, all that happens every single year in any position room is new players come in, right? Rookies come in. And so when you are a veteran in the NFL, you have to continuously prove that you still belong. And to me, D'Ernest Johnson, he had 29 carries in this preseason which was something like 5 to 6 more carries than the next person. So that's not a lot. But when you talk about a 3-game stretch, you know, he's averaging almost 10 carries a game, which is a lot more than anyone else has seen in a preseason game. that's not easy to do, especially at the age that you're at, because you're sitting there saying like, hey, like haven't I proven myself as an NFL player? Like, do I really have to sit out here and do this, game after game in the preseason when I'm watching Derrick Henry joke around with Lamar Jackson on the sideline? I see players like Justice Hill, who, has been a great performer for them. He's not playing in games. Keaton Mitchell played about a series, right? In all three of these preseason games, he played one series total for the Ravens. But D'Ernest Johnson went out there and he performed, and he did well, right? He had about 4.3 yards a carry for the Ravens going throughout this preseason. And so to me, I have to give my flowers to D'Ernest Johnson. Thought it was really cool what he did for the Ravens. And again, it's not easy to do what you're doing when you're sitting out there going through these reps, still wondering if you're going to make this team, right? The Ravens running back room is pretty packed, and he did a really good job of continuing to fight and show that he still belongs in the NFL. The last senior superlative I want to give out for the 2025 NFL preseason is Best Entertainer. Now, this one might seem to be obvious for others, but I still have to give this guy flowers because, one, he's in a terrible situation, in my opinion. But also, besides the holdout that were happening around the NFL, right? Besides, Trey Hendrickson, besides Micah Parsons, besides Terry McLaurin, who has now signed, the player that most people were talking about was Shedeur Sanders, right? Shedeur Sanders, he entertained us throughout this entire preseason. Now, the preseason, I would say, for NFL fans is not for your casual watcher, right? Most casual NFL fans, they'll appear when week one starts, right? But those true hardcore NFL fans, people like me that just love the sport and just can't wait to watch football week in, week out, they're looking for those exciting stories. They're looking for, the players to shine and to prove themselves as like a hope, right? That's what fans are looking for. They're looking for hope. I'm not saying Shedeur Sanders is the great hope for the Browns, but he kept us entertained this entire time. He for me, he had one of the most ridiculous pregame arrivals I've ever seen. He had a posse with him. There were his teammates, but he had a boombox that was playing his music, right? So he walked into the stadium with a boombox playing Shedeur Sanders music. And to me, he had to go out there to prove that he was more valuable than a fifth round pick that the Browns used on him. And in the first preseason game, I'd say he did. In the first preseason game, he was super entertaining, right? He had a great performance for them. Unfortunately, he got injured and missed his second preseason game. And again, everyone was still talking about that, right? Shedeur Sanders wasn't even playing, and they were still talking about him, right? They made everyone want to say Dillon Gabriel should not be in front of Shedeur Sanders on this depth chart. And unfortunately for Shedeur, again, entertainment, whether good or bad, he had, I would say, a less than impressive third preseason game, right? To the point where for the 2-minute drive, the Stefanski took Shedeur Sanders out of the game. I still don't understand that decision, right? Kevin Stefanski, to me, I'm not even sure why he's still an NFL coach, in my opinion. I think he's probably a good guy. I think he'd probably be a really good coordinator, but he has done nothing to me to prove that he should be a head coach. I think really he's the head coach of the Cleveland Browns because it's the Cleveland Browns and they keep screwing up from an organizational perspective, and they're probably looking at this as if it's not Kevin Stefanski's fault. But to me, Kevin Stefanski should not be a head coach. The fact that he took Shedeur Sanders out for the 2-minute drill at the end of that game and put in Tyler Huntley, a guy that I like. I really respect Tyler Huntley. Actually, I'm hoping that he ends up on the Baltimore Ravens as a backup because the Baltimore Ravens backup QB situation is just absolutely atrocious. Cooper Rush did a pretty good job his second and third preseason game, but Devin Leary, who was a draft pick 2 years ago, looks like he doesn't even belong on a college football field, in my opinion. So, again, I say all this to say that Shedeur Sanders, to me was super entertaining throughout this entire preseason, and I really hope that he ends up in a better situation, because to me, again, Kevin Stefanski is not a head coach there, and he shouldn't be a head coach anywhere. So that's it for my senior superlative aspect of this. Any thoughts on and those senior superlatives? Any senior superlatives you want to give out in chat? Feel free to put them out there. Excited to hear what you guys think about that. Next, I'll be going over who I think had the top 5 performances overall in the 2025 preseason. All right. So going into the top 5 players of the 2025 preseason, there's a pretty solid mix that I have here, but the first one that I want to actually get into is second-year running back out of Boise State, George Holani. So George Holani, first off, had 12 carries for 110 yards and a touchdown. Now, that's averaging 9 yards a carry, and if you're doing that over 10 carries, that's not easy to do. Even in the preseason, that's not easy to do, right? George Holani has always had to fight for a spot on an NFL team, right? He is in his second year. He went undrafted. I think a lot of the reason why he went undrafted is he had to share the backfield with Ashton Jeanty at Boise State. I was looking at George Holani's stats while he was at Boise State, and his best performance was his junior year, which isn't necessarily normal, right? When you normally see someone playing in the NFL, you see, I would say, an upward trajectory throughout his entire college career. But unfortunately for him, he had to sit behind, or he had to share the backfield, I should say, with Ashton Jeanty at Boise State. And so that's not easy. His junior year, I should say, he had 221 carries for a little bit over 1,100 yards, and he had 10 touchdowns. And then his senior year, he had 134 carries, right? So he almost lost 100 carries total, a little bit less than 100 carries. He had 748 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he had 3 less touchdowns on a lot less carries. So that, to me, is production. That's showing upward trajectory. But the problem is he was sharing the backfield with Ashton Jeanty, who was the first running back taken in this NFL draft, right? That's not easy to do. That's not an easy circumstance to be in if you're George Holani. And, being with the Seahawks, they have opportunities for him to be able to play, right? I think, you have Walker, right, as their starting running back. Kenny Walker, he's a great running back. He's a big-bodied running back. But to me, when I see George Holani, he makes the first guy miss almost every single time, right? I think that's a huge aspect of being successful in the NFL is you're not going to be the most athletic. You're not going to be the biggest anymore. And to me, making the first guy miss is a crucial aspect of being a successful running back in the NFL, because you always need to be getting positive yards. You can never stay behind the chains in the NFL if you want to keep your job. And to me, he has good feet, he has great vision, and he has really good change of direction. There's a lot of times, the play might be set up to go into one gap, and he's bouncing it out to the outside, or maybe he's going from the outside and bouncing it back in to make some pretty big plays. He didn't necessarily have any home run plays in the preseason. His longest run was for 20 yards, again, which makes that 9 yards a carry even more impressive, right? There wasn't some outlier where he ran for 50, 60 yards for a touchdown to make his average go up, but he's just consistent. And so for me, George Holani, I think he deserves a roster spot. I hope that the Seahawks keep him there, because I think he could be a really good backup running back for the Seahawks for years to come. The second top performer I have in this NFL preseason, I've actually talked about him before already on this show in a different episode, but I was really impressed with Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett, first off, I don't think people remember, he took a year off essentially after the preseason, his rookie year, to handle some mental health issues. I think he was having some issues with drinking, And it really was impacting Stetson Bennett. But if you remember Stetson Bennett in college, he is a national champion, right? He led the Georgia Bulldogs to a national championship, and he was a very loved guy there, right? He had a very impressive senior season. He threw over 4,000 yards, had 27 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, right? Those are big time numbers. Now, when it comes to the NFL, he hasn't put up a single stat in a regular NFL season game, right? And so that alone is a reason why you need to be proving yourself in the preseason on a regular basis. He's sitting behind Matt Stafford as well as Jimmy Garoppolo. I myself am not a Jimmy Garoppolo believer. I think he's really still in the NFL because he showed flashes like 4 or 5 years ago. Right? That is Jimmy Garoppolo to me. He's a guy that showed flashes 4 or 5 years ago and hasn't done anything since. The last time I remember seeing Jimmy Garoppolo in anything of importance was in the Netflix show Wide Receiver, where Devontae Adams is talking about how he's going to get killed out there because Jimmy Garoppolo was just leaving him out to dry. Now, Stetson Bennett, again, he has had a very impressive preseason with 512 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, including some exciting like game-winning drives where he's actually played a majority of the preseason this year for the Rams, right? They really kept Jimmy Garoppolo out for a lot of the preseason, and then Matt Stafford's been dealing with his back issue really the whole entire preseason. He's back at practice, and again, I've talked about this before, but I don't necessarily see Matt Stafford being able to play a full season with a nagging back injury. I think he's going to be out there week 1. But again, what happens when Nick Bosa hits him in the back, right? You're going to put Jimmy Garoppolo out there? Again, I've already mentioned Devontae Adams definitely is not a fan of Jimmy Garoppolo. And again, Stetson Bennett has proven to me, at least in this preseason, that he has the ability to play in the NFL. The biggest, I'd say, issue that Stetson Bennett has is his size. But again, when you throw for 512 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, to me, that's a really crucial performance in the preseason. He won them some preseason games, like I said. So again, I do consider him one of the top performers in the 2025 NFL preseason. All right, next player I want to talk about, and this is another quarterback, another non-rookie quarterback as well, but Tyson Bagent, right? Quarterback for the Chicago Bears, right? He's the backup to Caleb Williams. First off, congratulations to Tyson Bagent for securing a contract, right? This is a guy that went undrafted out of Shepherd College, right? Most people don't even know where Shepherd College is. I can tell you it's in Pennsylvania. The only reason why I know that is I know someone that went there, but I don't know them for football whatsoever. But Tyson Bagent obviously has always had the world going against him when it comes to opportunities to get into the NFL and to play. And he made a name for himself last year, performing in some actual regular season games. I think that was a huge aspect of what honestly probably earned him some ability to get this contract. That was actually 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, he played in 5 games. And he had a 65% completion percentage, almost threw for 900 yards. He did have 3 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, right? So the 6 interceptions is not what you want to see. But again, focusing on this preseason, again, he signed a 2-year deal worth $10 million. So that's $5 million a year to a guy that went to Shepherd College, right? I don't think anyone expected that, but I'm so happy for him. I'm so proud for him. And he also backed that up in this preseason, and I think this is why he earned this contract. He threw for 511 yards. He had 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. So that alone shows huge progression, right, in his game. It shows that he can be a manager of a game if he has to, and it shows he also can win some games. He had a game-winning drive as well for the Chicago Bears. And so for me, again, the preseason isn't about the starters generally anymore. It's about depth. It's about finding people that will save your team in a pinch, right? If something happens to Caleb Williams, how will the Bears do without him? And I think with Tyson back there at quarterback, you have to feel a lot better about that as a Bears fan and as a Bears organization. So again, well deserved contract by Tyson Bagent. Very happy for him. Another player that I want to talk about, and this is actually on the defensive side, and this is someone that is also a undrafted rookie free agent, and he's actually out of Rutgers. But this is Eric Rodgers, the cornerback for the Chargers, right? Eric Rodgers has been nothing but impressive this entire preseason. He's still listed at the complete bottom of the depth chart for the Los Angeles Chargers, right? There are 7 or 8 cornerbacks that are listed ahead of Eric Rodgers on that depth chart, and they still haven't necessarily mentioned whether or not he's made this team. We're still waiting to hear about that. But if I'm a Chargers fan, if I'm in the Charger organization, I want Eric Rodgers on my team. He's a longer cornerback. He's listed at 6'2", 190. Not a lot of people know about him because I think he transferred out of Northern Illinois and played his last season at Rutgers, who obviously still isn't like a powerhouse. And he didn't necessarily test that well either at the combine, right? He ran in the high 4.5s from a 40 perspective, which I think really hurt him. Like, if you don't have the game tape, if you don't invest in watching a player like Eric Rodgers from a scouting perspective, you're going to miss a lot of the intangibles and key aspects of a player when it comes to being able to be an NFL caliber cornerback, right? A big aspect that people talk about is game speed, right? There are people that can run a race and they can sprint fast, and that's exciting, right? A lot of people get excited mostly about 40 times when it comes to the NFL Combine. A lot of times teams don't necessarily pay attention as much to that because they like to look at tape, right? Because a big aspect of this is game speed. Game speed is a huge aspect of this, and to me, he had four passes defense, right? So he essentially stopped 4 completions from happening in the game. He had 1 forced fumble, and he also had 2 interceptions in the preseason. And again, you have to remember this. You're talking about not like a full game, right? He had 2 interceptions in 3 games. I think if you were probably to put together all 3 of those games, it would probably equate to 1 full game of performance for Eric Rodgers, right? So imagine him doing this if he played all defensive snaps as a cornerback in a normal NFL regular season game. That's probably what it equated to with the amount of plays and the amount of snaps he got in the preseason. Because again, they're also trying out other people. It's not like they're sitting there saying, "Hey, let's see what Eric Rodgers can do. Let's put him out there for this whole game," right? He's trying to make this team along with the other cornerbacks, and he was the last player on this depth chart. So they had to check out and look at other players ahead of them to see, like, hey, are they performing, right? You have to think about that when you think about these stats, right? 4 passes defense, that's not something that you're going to look up and say, like, oh my god, that's amazing, right, in a 3-game span. But when you think about the amount of snaps he probably got in those 3 games, again, Eric Rodgers to me is someone that I think should make this LA Chargers team. I really hope he does. If he doesn't, I hope another team picks him up, because to me, he's proven himself as an NFL caliber cornerback. The last guy I want to talk about from most impressive preseason performances is Austin Booker, edge rusher for the Chicago Bears, right? So Austin Booker, he was drafted 5th round out of Kansas in 2024, and he's a pretty big-bodied edge, right? He's 6'6", 245 pounds, so that's a pretty daunting person. That's a pretty, I would say, intimidating body, right? But he led the NFL this preseason with 4 sacks, and he also had 1 forced fumble, right? Again, I talked about this with Eric Rodgers. Like, he isn't playing a full game when this happens, right? Austin Booker isn't out there for every defensive snap in these 3 games. They're also looking at other players. And so having 4 sacks in 3 games is crazy. I mean, they have edge rushers like Montez Sweat out there, and they also have Deo Adebayo, and I probably messed that name up. I apologize. But Austin Booker showed that he deserves to be out there. He deserves to have snaps in this regular season. Because again, if you look at the amount of snaps he had, to have 4 sacks in that is extremely impressive. And again, I had to put him in my top 5 when it comes to overall preseason performances. Last thing I'm going to get into is undrafted rookies, because to me, preseason is all about those hopeful stories. Preseason to me is all about those success stories, those Cinderella stories, right? I love it when an undrafted rookie free agent makes a team. To me, there's certain organizations that take pride in finding those hidden gems, finding that hidden talent, and and so I love hearing these stories and finding those, I'll call them diamonds in the rough, when it comes to, you know, undrafted rookie free agents. And I've shown a lot of love to skill players, but so I want to give some shout outs to some other really some impressive players out there with this first one. Offensive guard for the Vikings, Joe Huber, right? So Joe Huber, first off, he's a guard out of Wisconsin who originally started at Cincinnati, and he actually followed his head coach from Cincinnati to Wisconsin, where he played his final season, and he had an extremely impressive preseason, right? I think he hasn't I think he hasn't necessarily technically made the team yet, but in his preseason, he had a 94.7 PFF grade, right? He had a 93.7 run grade, right? And then a 77.8 pass blocking grade. That is extremely impressive, especially for an undrafted rookie free agent. Everyone in the Minnesota Vikings media is talking about Joe Huber and someone they want to have make this team. And to me, when I look at him, all I see is upside, right? He wasn't drafted, but this guy actually played offensive line for the first time as a senior in high school, right? That's not a lot of time to get experience. A lot of these players that you see out here in the NFL, they've been playing at the same position. They've been playing football for decades, right? Since they've been like 10, 11 years old. And so Joe Huber, who played football but didn't play line until his senior year, to me has nothing but upside. And I really see him as the main backup at right guard behind Will Freeze, right? That's going to be a huge pickup for the Vikings, because again, depth is huge, and you need to use the preseason to find those diamonds in the rough, to find those guys that can step up in case you need them with an injury. And so Joe Huber to me is someone that definitely did that. Again, I expect him to make this team. They haven't officially announced it yet, but he's someone I'm excited to hear more about and see going into this NFL regular season. The next guy on this list, Efton Chisholm. Right? So Efton Chisholm is a wide receiver out of Eastern Washington. So I know this guy. This is going to be the guy that gets so many comparisons. I already know it, right? The NFL media is going to have a blast talking about Efton Chisholm for a couple reasons. First one being the fact that he went to the same school as Cooper Kupp, and he's a white wide receiver on the New England Patriots. Who do you think about when you think of wide receivers for the New England Patriots? Generally, Randy Moss might be the first name that comes to mind, but you're thinking of Julian Edelman, you're thinking of Danny Amendola, and you're thinking of Wes Welker. And Efton Chisholm is essentially the same sort of playing style, right? He is a small-bodied receiver. He's 5'10", 198 pounds, and as of now, he's made this NFL roster, right? This is an undrafted rookie free agent that's made the New England Patriots. And this is in a very, I would say, and I've talked about this before, the New England Patriots have a lot of very young middle round draft picks that they have at wide receiver, right? They had like Javon Baker, it's Keyshawn Butte, it's there's a couple of them out there, right? Demario Douglas, I expect to make this team. I'm sure he did make this team. But Efton Chisholm had his work cut out for him, right? Because again, they have so many of these mid-round wide receivers that they've drafted, and so generally those players get opportunities before an undrafted rookie free agent. But again, Efton Chisholm, he had he finished the preseason with 12 catches for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. And when I look at Efton Chisholm, the first thing I think about is like this guy is a lot harder to tackle than people realize. When you see a receiver like him out there and you're a cornerback or a safety, you're probably thinking to yourself, I'm gonna crush this guy. Like I hope this guy comes across the middle. I was watching tape of this guy. He goes across the middle all the time. He's most of the plays where I saw Efton Chisholm getting the ball, he's running a 2 to 3 yard route before he's catching the ball, right? So he's catching the ball near the line of scrimmage, and he's getting as many yards as I mentioned, right? He has a 10.1 yards a catch average, and to me that says a lot about who he is. I think to me that's a good one. We best trash talker, but to me again, Efton Chisholm, if you're averaging 10 yards a carry or 10 yards a catch, and you're catching the ball 2-3 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, sometimes even behind the line of scrimmage on screen passes, that's an impressive performance. That to me says, you are a playmaker. And again, every sign says he's made this NFL roster for the New England Patriots, and I expect him to actually have more of an impact on this team than people would expect. I don't think this is just a preseason performance. I think it's really going to be something where we see Efton Chisholm as potentially that third, fourth wide receiver later on in the season. It might not be immediately, but I expect to see him out there. All right, best trash talker. That's a tough one for the preseason. I don't think a lot of people are necessarily trash talking in the preseason. If I had to go with best trash talker, I've heard this from a couple of different players, and so maybe I'll put this name out there, but I heard that Josh Allen is an amazing trash talker. Josh Allen, I've heard he's witty, he's quick. I'm not sure if you watch Bustin' with the Boys at all, but one of the funniest interviews I've ever seen is actually with Josh Allen, and the reason why it was hilarious was Will Compton and Taylor Wan were interviewing Josh Allen in training camp. And the entire time, all three of them were just trying to get each other on dick jokes. They were trying to get each other to say ridiculous things to turn it into a dick joke. And it was one of the funniest interviews. This went on for like 30 straight minutes. And so for me, again, Josh Allen, I've heard is the best trash talker. I think he's hilarious, and so yeah, I'll give the best trash talker to Josh Allen, because again, you don't necessarily see it that much in the preseason. Going into another undrafted rookie free agent that I think really impressed is actually another wide receiver. It's Jackson Meeks. Jackson Meeks, he had he had a PFF grade of 92.1. Right, that's not easy to do if you are if you're a wide receiver, especially one that's undrafted. For me, again, Jackson Meeks, he's got a tough competition when it comes to making this team, right? The Detroit Lions have a pretty explosive offense already. Coming out of Syracuse, again, he's 6'2", 218 pounds. He's not necessarily the speediest guy, but again, you're competing with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You're competing with why can't I think? Williams, right? Let me pull up their depth chart real fast because my brain isn't working properly. But Jackson Meeks, again, he's competing with Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, Isaac Tesla, who I've already talked about in this show, right? I expect him to be someone that is going to make this team. Tim Patrick, right? He's towards the end of this depth chart. Jackson Meeks is, but again, he's done nothing but impress. I think he ended the season. Let me pull this up real fast. He ended the preseason with 11 catches for 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. Right, that's a 16 yards average per reception on 11, which is extremely impressive. And again, he's fighting a tough battle to make this team, right? He's got the cards stacked against him being undrafted. But when you have statistics like that, the good news is he's not just fighting to be on the Lions, right? Everyone else around the NFL is watching these games, and they're also trying to find players that they can pick up, right? Maybe they didn't make the best decision with their undrafted rookie free agents, or maybe there's a player they're expecting to step up this season that hasn't made the next step. Those are the types of people that can find Jackson Meeks. And so again, I have to give my flowers to him. The biggest thing I pay attention to when it comes to him is probably the fact that he forces a lot of missed tackles, very similar to Efton, right? I think Efton and him are very similar in the sense that they are a lot shiftier than you would expect, especially at Jackson Meeks' size, right? He's much bigger than Efton, but he makes players miss. And again, that's a huge value add when it comes to being a receiver or being a running back, is making that first guy miss, because you're going to have impressive, talented defensive players that are going to try to break up these plays. And being able to make the first guy miss, being able to get that first down is a huge way that you can make an NFL roster. So again, this undrafted rookie out of Syracuse, I really hope he makes the Lions. If not, I really hope that another team gives him an opportunity to make an impact in the NFL. That's it for me today when it comes to awards. Again, we went through a lot of different lists today. First off, those senior superlatives. Then it was just the overall impressive preseason performances, and then finally those undrafted rookies. I really hope these undrafted rookies make the rosters that they're currently on or another NFL roster. Excited to get into more of this this Wednesday. I'll be doing another live at 1 p.m. Eastern. Really excited to speak with all of you again then. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you again. This is Bad Takes with Bad Takes in Football, signing out.